So, Brooke, thank you for being here at Arlington Presbyterian Church, being here with us on via the Zoom. So I want to, just so people know how I know you, actually it was 3 years ago that you started interning in the summer at Church of the Pilgrims, when I was actually leaving for Arlington Presbyterian. And one of a sad point for me was not being able to finish out the summer with you. And so I'm thankful that we've maintained contact and connection, and that you have a willingness to share who you are with us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
So first, just a quick, who are you, Brooke?
Well, I am Brooke Scott. I am now a certified candidate in the PCUSA for ministry. So I completed the majority of the ordination process. Right now, I'm seeking a call, seeking a job that is a good fit for me. It's been most of this year that I've been doing that. I'm also a social worker, done some work with homelessness and mental health. And yeah, I'm finding myself back in Philly, where I'm from, and as I'm seeking next steps. And yeah, really just excited about what's next, and excited about what this year has been, which has just been a lot of networking and forging a way forward.
Great. So the second week of June, particularly the second weekend in the DMV, has been Pride Week, Pride Weekend. And so one of the questions that I have for you is and we know that Pride is a month, we know Pride is every day, but we know Pride is dedicated, the month of June has been dedicated to Pride because of the Stonewall moment, revolution.
Mhm.
And so I'm just curious for you, Brooke, to say something about what does Pride mean to you?
Yeah, Pride is really exciting. It's one of my favorite times of the year because it's also my birthday month. But yeah, Pride is exciting. It's, for me, I feel like it's a time of just celebration and resistance, celebrating things that have been invisible, that have been called, unholy and evil, things that have just been pushed aside, and all of that things. And it's centering those experiences and those identities and relationships that have just, been so hidden for so long. And then I guess like my personal connection to Pride has to do with this theme of invisibility and shame as well, because I have been out as bi pan since I think it's been about a year and a half. And yeah, my experience with it has been this invisibility. I think it took me a while to realize that I was queer, because I just didn't really have any examples of people who were bi or pan. Like I knew straight people and I knew gay people, and that's what I knew. And it was very easy for me early on to just default to like, okay, I like some of these guys, I'll just go with that. And never like having a word for the fact that like, I felt some of those things for girls too, but like, I didn't have a way to name that or see it as real. So it took a while to recognize it as something that was real and had its own identity. And then too, I think there is invisibility also in the queer community, stigma in the queer community around queer women who date men, and things like that, and like who we think is queer enough and who we think deserves more attention. So yeah, Pride is about saying like, I count, I'm part of this community too. Like who I am is not attached to who I'm dating at the time. It's about who I am, and I'm a part of this community. So it's about reclaiming and being visible.
Mm-hmm. And can you do a quick definition of how you define bi and how you define pan?
Yeah, for sure. And I use both of those for myself. I know that not everyone does, but for me, it is about not only having like the potential to be romantically, sexually attracted to more than one gender, but also really recognizing that like the thing that's most important to me is a person's who they are, their personality, their heart. And that, yeah, there are people I find attractive, and at the end of the day, like that is potentially a lot of different types of people who identify in a lot of different ways. And so I have found that bisexual and pansexual both fit my experience, but for a lot of people, they choose one or the other, and those distinctions are really important to them. And so I respect that and lift them up as well. So that's not going to be true for everybody, but for me, I just feel like they both fit, and it's never been, a binary thing. It's just been, yeah, people identify in a lot of different ways, and I have the potential to be attracted to all kinds of expressions, all different types of energy. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing, that makes me think about this Mark story in the Gospel of Mark that I just read was, it seems as if Jesus is telling his followers that when your hometown, when your people who say they're your people, when they make you invisible, when they try to silence you, when they try to erase you, that is not okay. And that you have a choice to make about your orientation, about where you literally turn your body around, and where you go next.
Mhm.
So it seems like, the work that you're doing is so sacred. I mean, and the community, the work of the community is doing so sacred, and clearly I feel like has these biblical roots um, of what happens when the erasure happens, when the invisibility happens, when that's tried to be placed upon you, and what a role is, and what your choices that you have.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing I really learned at Union, in seminary, was not a difference, but the expanded kind of definition of someone can identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and then there's this queerness that I
Mhm.
learned that is really about this worldview and how you see the world and how you see power, where your body fits into that, and not just your own, but your communities.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, and this was asked of you at in a podcast, a PCUSA podcast it was called Queering the Bible. And I'm wondering if you could kind of pick up on your response from that podcast about, your relationship with the Bible, with these biblical stories, and what they mean to you, and how you see them as a Black queer woman.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And I appreciate you naming queerness in that way, because that's why I use that label, because yeah, I'm bi, but queerness is also like an ethic that I use, in life. But yeah, so we talked a little bit about that in terms of queering the Bible. My relationship with the Bible is really complicated. Since I was very young, about 11, 12, where I really started to take it on as a study, and because I was weird and I
Okay,
like
that is so you to be 12 years old and like taking the Bible on, Brooke.
literally, it's the weirdest thing, and I could have been doing all kinds of other things, but I really wanted to study the Bible, and I really like took it under my wing as something to study and examine and understand. And so from a young age, it was something that gave me life. I fell in love with the history, I fell in love with the poetry, I fell in love with the Jesus I met in it. And yeah, that sort of all was self-motivated. My family, I just sometimes joke to say that my call to ministry came because my parents couldn't answer any of my questions. That's how it all started. Is I wanted to read this thing and they didn't know how to read it. And so I continued to knock on doors until I got answers. And so in that way, it was really a balm for me. It was really something that comforted me and helped me make sense of the world and helped me feel connected to God during a time when I really needed it. But I think as I got older, as the world became more complicated, it became something that also was used as a weapon. I was able to see clearly as I got older, and I really started to like formally study the Bible, and I started to go through life and go through grief and go through marginalization, that people were actually using the Bible as harm. And so I very quickly, recognized that it started to create a bad taste in my mouth, because I was like, it's actually, yeah, those are some bad people, but they're also quoting actual words. Like, they're not just making it up. And so I started to get really frustrated with the Bible and say, God, I don't even know why this is in here. Like, because it can be quoted and it can be used in these ways. And so, yeah, I was able to see the ways that, like, as I got older, all parts of my identity could be under attack, whether it was because I was a woman, whether it was because I was Black, whether it was because I later realized I was queer. Like, all these parts of my life, all these parts of my identity were attacked potentially using the Bible. And so it became this thing that really caused me a lot of pain and heartache, because I was like, this is not like, these attacks are not lining up with what I've experienced from it before. And yeah, so it's just become this very complicated, very comforting and painful thing at the same time. But I think that where I've kind of come to now is to really commit to reading the Bible from a liberating lens. I've been really influenced by womanist theologians and by queer theologians who, you know, they they're like Jacob, they wrestle with God until something comes out of it, and they wrestle with scripture until something good and liberating comes out of it. And I think that that really is how I approach it now, where it's like, I will work with this thing. I will, interrogate this thing until something liberating comes out of it. Both as, like a Black woman and as a queer person. Like, I want to read it in a way that speaks to me, but also speaks to the communities that I'm accountable to. Does this make sense to them? Does this give life to them? Does this harm them? And that's really my rule of thumb, is like, do no harm, especially to the people that I care about the most. And so, yeah, I am all for asking questions, all for interrogating scripture, queering the Bible, which is just so much about, you know, it's both about identifying people and relationships that have potential queer themes in them, but it's also about reading the Bible with a specific kind of ethic. The ways that it calls us to do certain kinds of ministry to queer people and to other marginalized communities, how we are to approach them, how we are to center them. Um, and it's also just some of the stuff, like one thing I said on the podcast was, sometimes when people hear queering the Bible, they think we're just adding things to the text that aren't there. And it's actually, some of it is that, because we're just being creative and having fun. But a lot of it is actually just like uncovering what's already there. We've tried to hide a lot of things as well, where it was like clearly like seeming gay, or clearly like seeming like it had one theme and we just covered it up. We interpreted it a certain way. We didn't want to talk about it. We were embarrassed by it. And yeah, reading from a liberation lens is saying, like, why do we try to hide that? That was actually important. That actually could speak to someone today.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm all about being expansive um, and reading so that it gets us to a point of liberation and creating real concrete change.
So the thing about, as you kind of stand on this, you're at this moment of being able to discern a call, accept a call, a congregation to call you to call, you feel called to a congregation. A call is also about choice and
Mhm.
having choice, and not just three choices.
Yeah.
Um, of and so I'm curious, the last question I have for you is, we want to, the denomination need, to have a call system, you know, let's assume that these congregations in the PCUSA need to do some serious work in order to be a place where you, Brooke, a Black queer woman, could come in and not be deeply harmed
Mhm.
by the systems and the ways and the thoughts, the worldview of a congregation, even if they say we're welcoming and we've done all these amazing things. And so I'm wondering, across the board, if you could tell that if the denomination, you have the power to tell every single church in the PCUSA, you need to do these three things,
Mhm.
knowing there's 25, but you need to do these three things in order to be a place where you, Brooke, can thrive, and live out your giftedness. Like, what are three things that every congregation in the PCUSA, APC included, need to do in order to set themselves up to be a choice for someone, to be a
Mm.
choice for you?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I think there are probably different layers to it. The first one, I guess, is just like the type of culture that we cultivate. One of the first things we can do is, I think that symbols are really important. I mean, I think that it's really, I mean, I'm going to talk about how like we need to go beyond the rainbow, but like rainbows are a good start because that helps get people in the door. That helps people know like what, where you stand and how they might feel when they walk in. It gets complicated when once they're there, but symbols are important. Symbols that help people recognize themselves and recognize their identities and where they're included and where they can even look, because yeah, choice is a huge thing here. Where like I'm looking for a call right now, and there are certain things I look for so that I don't have to go through painful situations and I don't have to have hard conversations. I look for symbols. I look at people's mission statements. I look at if there's anyone who looks remotely queer, like on their website or on their social media. So people look for things like that. I think also at the same time, we need to go beyond rainbows at the same time, like we also need to create culture like once people are in the door. And another thing I think that is really important is just transparency. That's been really hard to find in the call process. Like, I don't think there's any at all, like consistent transparency that churches are held accountable to. A lot of it is just like, you kind of guess how far their support actually goes, because maybe they have a rainbow, but maybe that is conditional. Maybe that means like you can get married here, but we would struggle to be led by a queer person. Or maybe it means like you can be a queer pastor, but you have to be celibate. Maybe it means like you can be pastor here only if you're partnered, and we're like already prepared for that, but we don't really want you running around and like dating whoever, like there's a lot of variations of like how people's support plays out. And I think that it's really important for it to be absolutely clear when churches are putting out their information forms and when they're offering calls to people, like, do you ordain queer people? And like, how far does that go? What does that include? Will you include anyone in any type of marital status? Will you include anyone, yeah, just like how far does it go? And I think then it's also about how not just having queer people in your community or having queer people in your pulpit, but like how does their presence and their identity and their expression and their relationship potentially like actually change how you read the Bible, change your theology, how you do liturgy. How does it shape your community? Like they're there, and has that changed the types of preaching that happens there? Has that changed the type of liturgy that's there? Has that changed the type of ministry that people there are involved in? I think that that's really important as well. Um, have you made it easier for that person to thrive in that environment? Because like I said, lots of things are expensive. Lots of things are, it's harder to connect with people um, that like share your identities. Like, has the church made an effort to create supportive community for that person? Or, if it's not in the church, are there people in the community that they could connect with?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think there's just a lot of ways to go beyond just the symbol and make it feel like, okay, I know exactly what I'm getting into. I know exactly what I'm consenting to, and it's clear. And even if the church is not fully where I want them to be, I at least can make an informed decision knowing that, you know?